So we'll be looking at chapter 4 of the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the Srimad Bhagavatam opens at the first chapter of Naimisharanya. And it starts as a story. Tamekada tamunaya praturhuta hutagnaya. And that is that one day, there's a way in which the sages have assembled there in the forest to perform a sacrifice. And the sacrifice was for the purpose of ascertaining the highest purpose of life. The sages, unguided or not properly guided, of course we know that the first guru there was Romaharshan, who had been killed by Balaram. Balaram was on pilgrimage at that time because he didn't want to get involved in Kurukshetra. He was friends with Duryodhana. In fact, in Mithila he had trained Duryodhana in club fighting, and of course he's Krishna's brother, friend of the Pandavas, awkward. So he went on pilgrimage and went to many places. During that time, he ended up at Naimisharanya as one of his pilgrimage stops. He still had work to do, killing, what's his name, who was bothering the sages? No. Yeah, he killed Vīta. There's the other one that was dumping stuff on the yagya stali. So when he went to Naimisharanya, he noted that Romaharshan didn't offer him respects. And the purpose of all of the Vedas is to come to the conclusion of my purpose in life is to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the essence of all advice, actually. To remember Him, ta ekada tamunaya, tasmad ekena mānasa, bhagavān sattvatam bhati, shrotavya kirtitavyascha deya pujascha nityada. One pointed attention. One has to know who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is, and then focus one's attention there. And one does that through the process of bhakti, shravanam, kirtanam, vishnu smaranam, padasevanam, archanam, vandanam, dasyam, sakyam, atmanivedanam. These are the 9 processes of bhakti. And as mentioned in the verse, tasmat ekena mānasa, bhagavān sattvatam bhati, he's the protector of the devotees. Shrotavya kirtitavyascha dhyeya pujascha nityada names the primary aspects that the devotee engages him or herself in remembering the Lord. But Romaharshan, although he had memorized and was conversant with all the Vedic literatures, something practically unheard of in this day and age, he didn't know what their purpose was. And therefore, presenting himself as a learned teacher, he was actually cheating. And Balaram noticed this when he went to Naimisharanya. Everyone stood up, as one should when a learned, great personality comes into the room or into one's purview. And he didn't stand up because he thought, what do I need to stand up for? I'm here on the Vyasasana and I'm the head person. So Balaram, noticing this anomaly, had executed him with a kusha straw. And after that, the sages, being aghast because they had blessed him with long life, said, now what? And Balaram said, oh, we'll take it back if you wish. And they said, no, it's your will. Let's fix it. And someone came up with a verse that the son is the same as the father, so let's empower the Sutta, the son of Romaharshan, who is known as Ugrashrava. Ugrashrava means one who's been fiercely hearing. Ugra means fierce, and Shrava means that he had applied himself, so much so that when he was anointed thereafter by the sages, they said that you're conversant with all of the knowledge of the Vedas because of your dedication to your Guru Gana, You have many gurus, you've learned from them because you're somya. It means you're a gentle soul, you're humble, you're open, and you applied yourself. And therefore, you're qualified to represent this tradition and sit before us as our teacher. So they were depending on Sutta. Meanwhile, they asked Balaram to do some penance to free himself from the offense of disrupting the yajna. So maybe it was Balval that was disrupting the yajnas at that time, as demons like to disturb anything dharmic. So he'd fly over the yajnastalis and dump stuff. I won't go into details what he dumped, but it would contaminate everything. So Krishna killed him, Balaram killed him. And then, of course, the sages went on there. We start off at the first chapter with them addressing Sutta. We know that they had a different idea to begin with. They weren't completely clear about how to perform the sacrifices there or how to proceed. And it's mentioned in the Bhagavatam that they had gotten black smoke from their yajna, from performing the homa, and it didn't look like it was going well. But when they met Sutta Goswami, then he began to teach them the essence of all the Vedas. And they wanted to know that. They said, Burini Budi Karmani Shrotavyani Vibhagasha Ata Sadyo Trayatsaram Samudrita Manishaya Bruhi Bhadraya Bhutanam Amritattvaya Kalpate. What is it? Out of all the Vedic processes and so many rules and regulations that have been there for generations and many different kinds of shastras that apply to different kinds of people at different times, there's these various shastras that describe how to live life in the material world, and then of course there's the Upanishads, and there's so many dharma shastras that teach one according to one's ashrama and varna, how one must perform rules and regulations. So what's the essence? Because as they note in the first chapter in the Kali Yuga, prayanal payushashabhya kalavasmin, mostly people they're short-lived, and also they don't have a good attention span. And they also come up with stupid ideas, really stupid ideas. So what are you going to do in the Kali Yuga? How will people be delivered, they wanted to know. And just give us the very essential part of it. And then Sutta then starts off by telling the story of Vyasadeva, Vyasuvacha, iti samprashna samrishto vipranam ramaharshani pratipuja vachastesam pravatum upachakrame. And then Sutta tells about how the son of Vyasadeva was Shukadeva Goswami, how he hesitated to come into the world out of the womb of his mother because he was wary of the influence of the material energy and didn't want to be captured by Maya. And when he was born, he was 16 years old or so, already did his SATs. Actually, he didn't. Apetya kritya means he didn't do any of that. He skipped the whole process of apetya, and he just took off because he was an enlightened being, albeit he had not yet achieved the conception of the personality of Godhead, which is the whole subject matter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he left home out of a sense of abject renunciation of the world. Didn't care for it, didn't want to get involved. His father, Vyasadeva, incarnation of the Lord, cried after him, so, come, sir, son, come back. And only the trees echoed in response to the bereaved father. And, of course, we know from the other Puranas the story how Srila Vyasadeva induced his son to come back because although he had gone to the forest to live in solitude and be absorbed in spiritual realization on the level of Brahman, his father knew something more. Now, this brings to an important point about how do we account for all the various ways in which people approach God. in the world. In the Bhagavad Gita 17th chapter, in the outset, Kṛṣṇa talks about the ways in which everyone has been affected by the three modes of material nature, various combinations and permutations, and therefore they have different outlooks and different approaches to the world. We have, as Kṛṣṇa says, a certain impetus within us already. That's the nature of a living being, is to want to enthusiastically do something. In fact, this morning when I was chanting the Gayatri mantras, I was particularly noting, as I have before and often like to do, in the meditation on the mantras, the word prachodayat, which means that the Lord wants to enthuse us. There's a natural tendency to be enthused. Of course, the word enthusiasm means the God within, entheos. What it means really is that we have our own impetus. We want to create. We want to love. We want beauty. We want the aesthetics of life. That's what satisfies us. We can't live without beauty. Try flying more than 14 hours in an airplane, and after a while, everyone's, even with television in front of everyone's face, says, "Let me out." In fact, people, when you get up out of your seat, everyone's trying to push for the light of the door. Like, I want air, I want trees, let me out of this plane. So there's a way that everyone has the impetus to love, to see beauty, but they see through the lens of the modes of material nature, says Kṛṣṇa. And that he makes this statement, Shraddhamayo Purusham, that the living entity is made of his or her faith. That's what you are. That's why you have a predisposition towards certain kinds of beauty and certain types of aesthetic, the music you like, and so forth. It's a dictated desire because of our previous associations. However, he says, at the core of that is our natural state, which is to be in love with God and to have a full-blown relationship with the Supreme, of whom we're part. Mamayavamsho jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana, manakshastan indriyani prakritistani karshati. Kṛṣṇa explains in the Bhagavad Gita that we're one with God, at the same time we're separate. This is one of the intricacies of the philosophy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which perfectly brings together all the different ideas of the great acharyas. A concept in the practice of the present-day discipline we have of bhakti yoga, which is on display in Mayapur, where Srila Bhaktisiddhānta Saraswati Thakur had his flagship temple, where he worships Gandharvika Giridhari. And in that beautiful temple there, right near Yogapith, you'll notice that he has the four sampradayas represented by the four different acharyas, and that their original personalities who form the genesis of that. Yeah, in our sampradaya, of course, it's Brahma. And then in the Ramanuja sampradaya, it's Lakshmiji, and so on. Then we have the Nimbarkas, the four Kumaras. And who else do we have? Huh? Yeah, and then Lord Shiva and Vishnu Swami. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu synthesizes all of those, or he's given them the service of bringing to light various aspects of the Absolute, which are very important, and then he brings them all together in the perfect philosophy of achintya bhed abhed tattva, which means we're simultaneously one with, but different from God. So our relationship is he's the whole, we're the part. And mamai vamsho jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana, means we're eternal, and we eternally have that position. It's not that at one point when we attain perfection or nirvana, we are freed from our obligations to the material world due to our interaction with it. We've run up a debt called karma. There isn't a way in which then we become God again. We're always part of God. And when we realize that, we realize a relationship as part and Krishna as the whole. And so when Shuka went away, he had a partial realization of the Supreme. And this is getting back to my point about the various ways in which people endeavor to reach God. In fact, every living being has an eternal relationship with God already. It's not something that is added from the outside. Nitya siddha Kṛṣṇa prema sadhya kavunoy shravanam shuddha citte kara udoy. We all have the innate desire and to love. And to love whom? God, because there is nothing else but besides God ultimately. It's advaya tattva. There's only one thing, and it's God. But he has different aspects and different features and different qualities of energy. And so Prabhupada writes in his purport to the invocation of the Sri Upanishad, Om Purnamada Purnaminam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vaiśeṣika. That's the invocation, which indicates that the Absolute Truth is perfect in all ways. And our relationship with him is perfect. And then Prabhupada gives this very important and helpful comment in his purport that all forms of imperfection that we experience are due to incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. Or rather, he says, all forms of incompleteness that we experience are due to incomplete knowledge of the complete whole. And an example that Bhaktivinoda Thakur gives is that according to our distance from a mountain may appear as fog or haze or even clouds in the distance, may be so amorphous from a distance that we can't tell that it actually is a mass of earth. And when we get closer, we see the shape of it. You can actually see the crags and the mountain peaks and valleys, the crevasses within the mountain itself. But then when you get on the mountain itself, then you find that there's trees and deer and maybe even people walking around. And he gives this comparison to our incomplete or complete knowledge. The more complete it is, the more we realize the details, the specificity of the Supreme, the closer we get. And the idea behind bhakti is that it's as close as you can get. I heard an interview recently. There was some release of a documentary about a famous entrepreneur named Martha Stewart. Did you ever hear of her? If you haven't, you better catch up on your Americana, because she's an important personality in Americana. And a very successful woman, one of the first successful women entrepreneurs in modern history. She had been sentenced to jail. Interesting life. It was a tax anomaly she had. And I won't go into detail on it, but the interviewer, the point is this, the interviewer was the person who wrote the documentary was being interviewed, and the person asked, so, how did you get her to be so vulnerable? Because in the documentary, which I didn't see, he said she really revealed a lot, more than most people had ever heard of, and it was noticeable that she really held forth and told about her life. So much so, the interviewer of Martha Stewart said, she surprised herself, because after she said, oh my God, I said a lot more than I thought I was going to say. And so the person, the interviewer of the documentarian said, so how did you do that? And he said, do you have to develop trust with these people? Oh yes, the interviewer said, it's all about trust. Said, that's the art of interviewing someone and getting the knowledge. And this is the process through which one can come to have as complete knowledge of the Supreme Whole as possible. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had mentioned this when he was talking to Venkata, and he uttered a verse from the Srimad Bhāgavatam in which it is said that only by bhakti, not by other processes where one may be intellectually analyzing the Supreme, or by doing some kind of physical yoga in order to regulate the senses, but only by the process of bhakti, where one develops trust in the Lord, and the Lord develops trust in the devotee, and then there's an intimate relationship where the Lord reveals himself. So Vyasadeva knew this, and when his son went away, was absorbed in this monism, he knew he could attract his son back by giving indications that there was something that he was missing. He didn't have complete knowledge of the complete whole. And so part of that is very intuitive in bhakti, because although we may not study it completely, it is recommended that we study the science of bhakti. Tacchadhatana muniyo jnana vairagya yuktaya pashyantyatmani chatmanam bhakti shruta grihitaya. This is something Sutta Goswami says at Naimisharanya to the sages, that it's important to be fortified by shastric knowledge, and also by a sense of detachment from the world. So Vyasadeva knew that the sound vibration of Krishna's pastimes have their own potency. That's why Sutta has said, Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyantaksto hyabhadrani vidunoti suhritsatam. That it's a meritorious activity just hearing about Krishna. And as Shukadeva has mentioned in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's immense potencies. In fact, the potency of Kṛṣṇa and his association is directly available by hearing about him. He said, Vikriditam Vrajavadur Birahan Vishnu Shradhanvitona Shinu Yatatavarna Yadya Bhaktim Param Bhagavati Pratilabhyakam Amrid Rogam Ashvapahinot Yacharina Tihira. That if one simply hears from the Srimad Bhagavatam about the personality of Godhead and his relationship, especially in Vrindavan with his most intimate devotees, that sound vibration, if one hears faithfully, that it transforms the heart. And so Vyasadeva had this conviction, and he sent out some of his disciples into the forest where his son Shukadeva had repaired to, a solitary place, and they began to recite verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam, including Aho Bhakiyam Stanakalakutam Chikamseya Payad Apyasadvi. It's a verse about Putana, the first demoness who Krishna killed, and it's a kind of lament by Uddhava. You find it in the 3rd canto where he's saying to Vidura, he said, oh, where are you going to find anybody this merciful? That he doesn't judge, even though Putana came to kill him. He said, well, she has some qualification, she dressed up as my mother. And upon hearing these verses, they have so much potency that Shukadeva Goswami, from his point of being completely detached from the material variety, knowing that it's a trap, because it's a reflection of reality, and one becomes absorbed in the reflection of reality, then one becomes entangled in it. And it's really hard to disentangle oneself. So he had gotten to the point of disentangling himself, but he wasn't yet entangled in the transcendental world. Mahatmanastu mam partha daivim prakritim ashrita. The greatest souls are entangled in the internal potency of the Lord, and that includes the process of a relationship with Krishna. But when he heard these verses, he became attracted and wanted that relationship with Krishna. It became his main focus in life. So his interest in life had been upgraded from being detached to being attached to Krishna. Being detached from the material world, now he was attached to hearing about Krishna, which is non-different from being connected with Krishna in relationship. And so this is the story, how the Bhagavatam begins. And Sutta, and as we know in the 2nd chapter, gives a summary of the process of devotional service, beginning with Shushrusho Shradhanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahat Seveya Vipra Punya Tirtha Nishevanat, that when one comes in contact with devotees who have this proclivity to hear about Krishna, as also mentioned later in the third canto, an appropriate verse, satam prasangam mamavirya sambido bhavanti hrit karna rasayana kata taj joshanat ashwapavargavart ninishara ratir bhakti anukramishati. There's a way in which, by associating with those who are already attracted to the supreme reality, who's the personality of Godhead, Krishna, and they want to hear about him, and when you get around them, they're discussing this. Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita, Matchita magata prana bodhayanta parasparam katayantashamam nityam tushanticha ramanticha. This is how devotees spend their time, he says. Oh good, we didn't get kicked out, it's just numbers. He says that devotees, they're always discussing him, Krishna. That's how they tushanti cha ramanti cha. That's how they get satisfaction, and that's how they enjoy. They're discussing. So satam prasangam virya sambido. If you're around devotees who have this proclivity to talk about Krishna, think of Krishna, and their ultimate goal of life is to develop the relationship with Krishna, then you'll get it too, and it'll transform you. And you'll start going for that also. And shraddha, ratir, bhakti, anukramishati. Anukramishati means step by step in that association, you'll attain everything. You'll make progress in devotional service. So that starts off with association of devotees, sadhu sangha, and then as described in the other parts of that paragraph, shinvatam swakata Kṛṣṇa, and then, what's the next verse? Nashtraprayeshu bhadreshu, then tada rajas tamo bhava, etc. Culminating the vidyate hridaya grantish. And it's just by doing the positive thing, yoga means plus, Prabhupada said. You do the positive thing, associate with pure devotees, hear about Krishna, then naturally your interest in the material world is what is described in this verse. It's cut. You don't have that tether anymore. And now your objective is to look for Krishna. Something Krishna mentions also in the Gita in the 15th chapter, where he says, Narupam asyeha tato palabhyate nanto nachadirna chasampratishta ashvatamenam savaruda mulam asanga shastrena dritena chitva. He says, the material world, has been giving this metaphor in the 15th chapter. The material world's a tree, and it's called vriksha. Vriksha means that which will eventually be cut off. And he said, you're absorbed in this tree. He compares to a banyan tree. It's so vast that you don't know where you are in it. You don't know how you got here. You don't know where you're going. There's no there is a sign that says you are here, but that's the Vedas. You got to find those. And then he says, you have to know categorically that it's not your place. And therefore you should make a decision that I don't want to be absorbed here. But what are you going to do? If you don't have a superior engagement, then you're going to come back again and again. Have you ever had that? You have it, it's like, forget it, unless you have a better idea and better engagement, better friends. You just, like, how did I end up back here where I was before? Why can't I give it up? Well, Krishna says, tatapadam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gata no nirvartanti bhaya tameva chadyam purusham prapadye yatak praviti prashita parani. Said, now, once you cut it, you have bhakti. You take your journey back to Krishna by engaging in bhakti yoga. And then you have an objective, tat. Like Om Tad Vishnu Paramam, Om Tat Vishnu Paramam Padam. It means like, I'm going this way. Sorry, don't have time. So this is the gist of the teaching of Sutta in the second chapter. And then the third chapter, he starts talking about the avatars of the Lord. And he says, if you're able to recite these in the morning and the evening, you won't be touched by the material energy anymore. The indication of how potent bhakti is that, okay, even if you're a neophyte, if you learn how to recite the appearances of the various avatars of the Lord, then you're going to be transcendentalized, because sattvam rajas tamayiti prakritir gunastar eka yukta para Husha eka hihasyadate stityade harivarinchi hariti samya shayamsi tatra kalu sattva tanor nirnam suhu. Means, this is something Sutta also said, that there's Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Of these three great controllers of the material world, you'll benefit the most from Vishnu, because he's beyond the material nature. And in that chapter 3, we hear the directive, Kṛṣṇe swadamo ete chamsa kala Kṛṣṇa. Sorry. Ete chamsa kala pumsa Krishnas tu bhagavān swayam indrari vyakulam lokam mridyanti yuge yuge. It's such a verse I take for granted that I barely say it. But it's the most important verse because we're coming more and more to the point. And Sutta Goswami says, yeah, there's all these avatars, but there's an origin to all of them. They all come from an original person. Something Brahma realized, and he gave the verse, Departure eva hita shantanama bhupeta, dipayate vrivata hetu samahana dharma, yes tadrageva hicha vishnu chaya vibhati govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. He said there is an origin to all the appearances of God, just like you have one candle, you light all the other candles. The original candle is there. So with that, we come to the 4th chapter of the first canto of the Bhagavatam, and it's called The Appearance of Sri Narada. And this is coming more and more to the point of specificity, and it's a story. And here we are, chapter 4, text number 1. It's Vyasa Uvacha. On hearing Sutta Goswami speak thus, Shaunaka Muni, who was the elderly, learned leader of all the rishis engaged in that prolonged sacrificial ceremony, congratulated Sutta Goswami by addressing him as follows. And here's the purport. In a meeting of learned men, when there are congratulations or addresses for the speaker, the qualifications of the congratulator should be as follows. He must be the leader of the house and an elderly man. He must be vastly learned also. Sri Shaunaka Rishi had all these qualifications, and thus he stood up to congratulate Sri Sutta Goswami when he expressed his desire to present Srimad Bhagavatam exactly as he heard it from Shukadeva Goswami and also realized it personally. Personal realization does not mean that one should, out of vanity, attempt to show one's own learning by trying to surpass the previous acharya. He must have full confidence in the previous acharya, and at the same time, he must realize the subject matter so nicely that he can present the matter for the particular circumstances in a suitable manner. The original purpose of the text must be maintained. No obscure meaning should be screwed out of it, yet it should be presented in an interesting manner for the understanding of the audience. This is called realization. The leader of the assembly, Shaunaka, could estimate the value of the speaker, Sri Sutta Goswami, simply by his uttering yata ditam and yata mati, and therefore he was very glad to congratulate him in ecstasy. No learned man should be willing to hear a person who does not represent the original acharya. So the speaker and the audience were bona fide in this meeting, where bhagavān was being recited. Bhagavatam was being recited for the second time. That should be the standard of recitation of Bhagavatam, so that the real purpose can be served without difficulty. Unless this situation is created, Bhagavatam recitation for extraneous purposes is useless labor for both the speaker and the audience. And the text 2, Shaunaka said, O Sutta Goswami, you are the most fortunate and respected of all those who can speak and recite. Please relate the pious message of Srimad Bhagavatam, which was spoken by the great and powerful sage Shukadeva Goswami. Purport. Ready? Yes. Sutta Goswami is twice addressed here by Shaunaka Goswami out of great joy because he and the members of the assembly were eager to hear the text of Bhagavatam uttered by Shukadeva Goswami. They were not interested in hearing it from a bogus person who would interpret in his own way to suit his own purpose. Generally, the so-called Bhagavatam reciters are either professional readers or so-called learned impersonalists who cannot enter into the transcendental personal activities of the Supreme Person. Such impersonalists twist some meanings out of the Bhagavatam to suit and support impersonalist views, and the professional readers at once go to the 10th canto to misexplain the most confidential part of the Lord's pastimes. Neither of these reciters are bona fide persons to recite Bhagavatam. Only one who is prepared to present Bhagavatam in the light of Shukadeva Goswami, and only those who are prepared to hear Shukadeva Goswami and his representative are bona fide participants in the transcendental discussion of Srimad Bhagavatam. And in a general way, I'll give it a little bit of analysis so we still have a little time for some discussion. From here, we're entering into the story of the appearance of Narada. And this is an extremely important part of the Bhagavatam because it sets the stage for one's full focus on Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we have the scene set already at Naimisharanya. And we even have a story, nested stories. Shonaka Rishi is addressing Sudha Goswami, congratulating him, appreciating his qualification again. And we're going to hear, what's coming up is how Narada Muni appeared. Of course, Narada Muni is the offspring of Brahma. There were, at the beginning of, well, it's a long story. I won't deviate too much. I'll just go to the essence of the point, which is that Vyasadeva, by the 5th chapter of this Bhagavatam, right now we're in chapter 4, it comes to the point where, although he's given his full concentration on doing his service as Vyas actually is just a generic term. It means the divider, or like an editor. He has taken the original Vedas, just the Veda is one thing, really, and he put it into various compartments and assigned it to various disciples, so they had lines in which they could teach the various parts of the Vedas. And then he had also revealed the Puranas, which are a way of completing the Vedic knowledge, which is not so accessible to people in a modern age, as it requires a particular atmosphere where one can live a different lifestyle, pristine lifestyle. It's compared by our acharyas to be the Puranas are a completion of the Vedic knowledge, just like if you have a bracelet and then it gets a gap in it because it's broken somehow. You can only complete it with the same kind of gold to make it whole. So the Vedas actually are considered by Jiva Goswami, if you've read the Tattva Sandarbha. If you haven't, see me afterwards. I have 2 copies left, according to what I heard. And they're more important than the Vedas because they give an explanation, a practical explanation of what the meaning of them is. So the itihasas, like the histories of the world, which contain these lessons, were all compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, made available to the world, but he wasn't satisfied. And he wasn't sure why. He just didn't feel right. So that's when he meets his guru in chapter 5. And coming to the point that can be helpful to everyone is that the reason, said Narada to Vyas, after meeting him and realizing that Vyas felt despondent despite his great endeavors to bring to the world this transcendental knowledge, he said that, well, you really missed the point. Naishkarmyam apyachuta bhavavarjitam nashobhate jnanam alam niranjanam. He said, although you've given knowledge of self-realization, and even though someone can come to the end of all work in this world for the sake of material progress, which is a rare thing, he said, still, nashobhate jnanam, whatever you've done, it's not attractive. It's not attractive enough to pull one away from the material world. You need escape velocity to get away from the gravity. And required is you have to have somewhere better to go, as I mentioned before. And as Kṛṣṇa mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, Vishaya vinivartante nirahara siddhānta rasavarjam rasopyasya parantushva nivartate. Unless you have somewhere better to go. And wow, look at that. I like that. See you guys later. Then you're not going anywhere. You're going to come back to the same. Aruya kṛṣṇa param hadam tata patantyato nadrita yushma. You'll keep falling back down again into the illusory pleasure of the material world because it's all you've got. So Narada says, you didn't give the real thing. Too much bridgy stuff. And not enough, here's the thing. And that's why bridgy stuff, it's at a certain point, you got to cross the line and say, Hare Krishna. Otherwise, it's a bridge to nowhere. And then the speaker doesn't feel satisfied like Vyasadeva. He wasn't satisfied. He compiled everything and he's like, meh. And Narada said, yeah, you blew it. But you can fix it. He said, talk about Kṛṣṇa and mention his direct pastimes in the spiritual world. So back to the drawing board. And then you find in the next chapter, or chapter after the next, in which fifth chapter, and then in the sixth chapter, Narada explains his story of how he came into the world. That's another topic. But then the next chapter, son of Drona punished, describes how he went back to the drawing board. Narada said, go back, start over. So he went back to Samyaprash, which is his cottage. Nice little timeshare if you can get it, because there's no modes of nature there. That's what you need, a place where there's no modes of nature. And then there he went into trance by the mercy of his guru, and he was able to, just as Valmiki was, by the mercy of Narada, and able to see Lord Ram's pastimes. And so as Vyasa is able to directly see the pastimes of Kṛṣṇa. And then when he came out of his trance, when he was able to see the existential situation of all living beings as being enamored by Maya, and seeing how all Krishna's energies were working, and that how Kṛṣṇa then was performing his lila in the spiritual world and in this world, then he was able to speak that. That's called samadhi bhashya. He went into samadhi, he was completely absorbed and saw it all, and then he came out, it's like, what'd you see? And then he speaks, and then it's like, that's it. So that's how the Bhagavatam emerges. First there's a preliminary understanding of spiritual knowledge, and then after the revelation he has meeting his guru, he speaks the full Bhagavatam. Of course, there are more extensive versions of the Bhagavatam, and lucky for us in some ways that we only have 12 cantos, because Jiva Goswami says in the Tattva Sandarbha, in some higher realms there are more cantos, like a lot more. I mean, we won't even get into it, but I don't know where we'd put them all. Definitely not in the parking lot. One set would fill up this whole temple room, so maybe next life. So those pastimes then become the subject of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, the first 9 cantos, then give us the ways in which to overcome the various attachments that we have, Vīta, rāga, bhaya, Krodha. The attachment to material energy, finished. By the time you finish 9 cantos, no thank you, no mas. I'm not interested anymore. I got a better place to go. And then the idea that the fear that one has of personal relationship with God, that gone. And it awakens in one's heart this idea. It's like, oh yeah, I want a personal, I already have personal relationship, but I want to pursue it. That's the impetus of the devotee, to jump up in the morning and say, here we go again, Krishna, I'm here. And then Krodha, this frustration that results from not having a object of meditation, and therefore you go on YouTube and everyone's got a different opinion, right? On everything. Cooking, health, philosophy, law, politics. There's 5 million different opinions, and if you just listen to them all, then you just go around bewildered. So you have to come to this point, siddhānta baliyā citte nakara alash, ha-ite kṛṣṇa lāge sudṛḍha. You have to hear Bhagavatam and hear how it comes from the point of view of advaya jñāna tattva, but then bringing your attention to, okay, there's one place, and it's ārādhyo bhagavān. There's a way that if you just focus your attention on Krishna, then you get everything. And there's something amazing in it for you, and that's the impetus of bhakti, is the eternal nature of the soul to love Krishna. And now we have time for a few reflections, because we just have 10 minutes left. Looking to Vaikuntha Nayaka. He's not there. Okay. Yes, Mayapur Vihari Prabhu. We'll get you a mic.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Pranam. Welcome back. Nice to have your darshan back, Mataji. And thank you for the wonderful class, Maharaj. Question, earlier in the class you mentioned associating with the devotees and serving one who has the taste. We develop similar taste. So my question is, in spite of associating, sometimes the mood of passion, I want to do this, I want to achieve this, or that is still not reducing. What can be the potential cause for this, or what are the reasons where the lack of things?
Well, Narada addresses this in the 5th chapter also. He said that if you get a disease of the stomach or the bowels by eating too much milk products, then there's a cure for it which comes from the same category. It's milk, but it's just dahi. Or even better, chach, buttermilk. They both have this enzyme in them that helps to bring your stomach back to order again. Enzyme, microbes, microbial action, all important. And then you can be cured. So the same thing that gave you the disease in the first place, it can cure you. So he says, no harm in being ambitious and working in the world. And that's something that Krishna says to Brahma in the Brahma Samhita. Near the end of the Brahma Samhita, he says everybody's engaged in some sort of service. But if you dedicate it to the Lord, then it becomes the source of your delivery. So you don't have to stop being ambitious. You're Gujarati, right?
Yes.
You're not going to give it up. It's in your DNA. So if you just dedicate it to the Supreme and say, I'm going to do this for Krishna, then it becomes transcendentalized. And that's one of the main points that Krishna makes in the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. He says, you can't stop fighting. Don't stop talking like that, and just fight. But remember why you're doing it. You're doing it for me. So this is the great opportunity of the Krishna conscious movement. You can be a spiritual entrepreneur. And everything can be put in this big fire pit called Sankirtan. Yeah. It's a yajna for the age where you say, oh yeah, everything goes in here because it's unlimited work to do to expand the Sankirtan movement. And we need entrepreneurs. We want money. If you have money, put it in the fire pit. That's why most people can't leave the room when we're doing Kṛṣṇa 10, Kṛṣṇa 9, because there's just something about it where you're thinking, yeah, this money's bugging me anyway. And once you put it in the fire pit and say, like, 5 sets, and then you're like, I feel better, because bhoktarang yalkatapasam. Krishna says, you want to feel peace? Gyafamam shantam richati. You just give it to me, because it's not yours anyway. So that's the open secret that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maharaj. Amazing.
Thank you for all you do. Okay, couple more. Yes, 1, 2. Running down 4 minutes left. Because we have a big Kumbh Mela of Sankirtan today. Yes.
So my question was that what qualities of Narada Muni do you appreciate the most?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, when he was a child, I was thinking back to that earlier this morning, about how even as a child, the sages stayed 2 seasons. It's mentioned there in the 5th chapter of the Bhāgavatam. It says they were ostensibly there for the rainy season, because that's what sadhus do. They find a place to repair to so they don't have to walk on impassable roads and travel around. So they just sit down for 4 months while the floods are coming. But they stayed an extra period. And it was because they were attracted to Narada, and that was when he was a child. He was precocious, spiritually precocious, and he was intelligent too. So these really advanced sages thought, this is worth the investment here. We're going to stay longer for this child. And one of the ways that Narada describes himself as a child, he said, I wasn't interested in nonsense. I didn't want to fritter away my time. Even when I was a child, I was serious. So I appreciate that. On our youth yatra, I kept quoting the song, and then everyone kept quoting it back to me, a lyric from a song from, what's his name? Elvin Bishop, thanks. Elvin Bishop, a singer from the 60s, 70s. Maybe he's still around. I think he's 82, still singing. But he wrote a song, I fooled around and fell in love. And it's the fooling around part. If you're not following Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, you're fooling around, and you're going to get caught. And you're going to regret it at some point, because it's inevitable for everyone. Even if you're a very intelligent, wise person, otherwise, you're going to get messed up. So I like that quality in him, that he didn't fool around. He knew what the purpose of life was, and he pursued it from the very beginning. And look what happened. Pavani Bhakti for the last word.
Thank you,
Unless
Maharaj.
Vaikuntha Nayaka shows up. Okay.
I just wanted to share personal. I have a question and one quick. When you came today, we take you for granted, but I could feel the presence of pure devotees, and it is really different when you are here. And thank you for giving us that glimpse of that spiritual bliss. My question is, in the class you did mention that some people come to Kṛṣṇa they have different modes. They are influenced by different modes, and they are not at probably the right state, but they are still coming to Kṛṣṇa. From our level, I want you to understand what's your instructions, how we deal with different people at different level when they approach Kṛṣṇa.
Well, a lot of it has to do with how we deal with ourselves. And we do have to be determined, and we do have to continue the process. That's one of the main important aspects of bhakti, is that if you keep going and you don't stop, even if you really think you're bad at it, then you'll be successful. And in that, you have to be a little forgiving. So there is a way in which one might compare oneself to others, and then think, oh, I'm no good at this, and I'm no good in general, so why even try? Or it's so out of reach, the idea of uttamadhikari and paramahamsa status and so forth is not possible for me. But that's illegal, because you have to remember, asango khyam purusha, we actually have nothing to do with the material world. We are part and parcel of Kṛṣṇa. Everything's possible. Srila Vyasadeva says it in the Vedanta Sutra. He said, why do you think all the Shastra is telling you to practice this? It's because you can be successful. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense, because they're talking to us. And so when we are a little forgiving with ourselves and determined to continue the process despite our own ineptitude, then we can also be forgiving in others. And it's the world oftentimes is very discouraging. the outer world and the inner world. Nothing goes right in the material world because we're dealing with a material energy. It's extremely confusing because it's all loaded up by the time factor. And whatever you think you're going to get, eventually it always twists in a different way. And it's like, how did that happen? And so we have to encourage ourselves by reading Shastra, staying on the practice, and then encourage others to continue. And the Bhagavatam says that you should be, it's not that we treat everybody exactly in the same way. When you're teaching Krishna consciousness, or when you're a teacher in general, it's a very individual process. It's not mechanical. People respond to personal attention and love and trust. It's not a mechanical process, and Rupa Goswami says that the foundation of Krishna consciousness, dadati pratigurnati guyamakyati prachiti punkte bojayate chaiva shadvidam priti lakshanam. Priti lakshanam means there's loving exchanges between devotees, and they come in the form of giving prasad, accepting prasad. So far, so good? No problem there. Giving gifts, accepting gifts, and then revealing one's mind, really speaking about your realizations and Krishna, speaking Krishna Katha and in hearing others. These 6, he said, are the 6 exchanges of love and devotional service. And when we're able to accommodate people based on those 6 loving exchanges, Prabhupada says, then you have a venue in which people will feel happy and satisfied. And also, as you know well, the Bhagavatam says, Ishvare tadadineshu balesheshu dusatsucha prema maitri kripopeksha yakaroti samadhyamaha. When you're out there attempting to practice Krishna consciousness and teaching it to others for your own purification, you also be observant with people's levels of advancement. Don't try to give too much to people who aren't ready for it. And also don't try to give it to people who don't want it. And when somebody shows that they're open, don't try to dominate them, but try to give them mercy. So it's an art and requires finesse. Well, I'm sorry, but I went over time. I did say that you'd be the last one, so Yashoda Vatsal Prabhu, I apologize. You write me a SMS, is that what they call it? And I'll answer your question later. We have to move on because this morning, hey, London's still there. Haribo. What time is it there?
It's 5:03 p.m.
Oh, 5 p.m.? 5:03
Yeah.
p.m. Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in. And everybody else who's online, we see you. We feel your presence. There's 66 devotees on the internet, 16 on Zoom, 82 altogether. And then all of us here at the Naimisharanya. Yeah, it's really good to be back. Thank you very much. We had a great youth yatra. It was better than it exceeded our expectations, and life-changing, I'd say. At least for us it was. And you never know till you do stuff. You might think it's going to be like this or like that, or you might think, oh, it's the same old thing. We're just going back to the Dom, that's all. The mind has a way of wrecking everything and saying it's all this and that. But when you go there and you have the experience, then it's yours to keep. So we have a lot that we've taken away. And that's why we're going back in about 3 weeks. I don't know, it's just the way things turned out. So now we have the next part of our program, which is prasadam. Okay. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Shri Lakshmi Shringadev, if you so desire, please let everyone become fully absorbed in taking prasadam and be fully satisfied by remembering Krishna's mercy upon us. And look